So with that, I will just ask if we can have the little video to get your heads bopping once again.
Catalyst 2030 started life as a WhatsApp group among social entrepreneurs connecting to envision real transformational change. Launched at the World Economic Forum in January 2020, it's grown into a global movement accelerating change to ensure the SDGs are reached by 2030. Fueled by passion, our 550 members working in 175 countries have collectively put in an amazing 50,000 volunteer hours, touching the lives of 2 billion people. And we're driven by values, to which we hold ourselves accountable. 2020 was a busy year, co-creating 3 reports with partners and producing one of our own. Inviting high-level guests to participate in the Catalyzing Change campaign, hosting fireside chats and expert hours, which will be continuing in 2021. To celebrate our achievements, together we placed our supporters in the limelight with the first Catalyst 2030 Awards for Systemic Change. With the blessing of the Dalai Lama, we celebrated finalists and winners in the following categories: special recognition for our early supporters, individual philanthropists, donor organizations, philanthropic intermediaries, corporate organizations, bi- and multilateral organizations, and 4 regional winners in the category of national governments. And now on to Catalyzing Change Week 2021. During this social entrepreneur-led event, we bring together diverse stakeholders in over 100 sessions to showcase their systems change efforts and the best practices that can accelerate our work in pursuit of the SDGs.
Wow,
Right, over to you, Steve.
Sorry, go ahead. I'll just hand over to Steve. You take the floor, please. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you so much. That makes me realize how much work I've been doing with Catalyst 2030. So welcome to this session. Some work that I've been doing with Catalyst 2030 and with the initiative that I'm leading, Bounce Beyond, is around this concept of transformations infrastructure for next economies. So we're focused upon the question of innovation that will be suitable for driving economies and the way that we can develop them with a new value structure. I'll introduce that in a moment. But first, I'd like to invite people who are here, both the panelists and others, to be able to put in the chat just their name, where their geolocation is, and maybe the name of 1 or 2 organizations that they are associated with. So while you're doing that, I will ask Faith if he would bring up the poll. We'd just like to know a little bit more about where everyone's from. So if you associate with any of these categories or the other, could you indicate just so we can get an idea? So this is for the panelists too. Oh. Okay, well, we have a shy group here. Only have 8 people so far who have voted. 3 of the people have voted. Okay. Thanks so much for giving us some hint about where you are, who you are. We'll share the results, but I think that we have a few people who have, great. So let's just jump right into where we are with our agenda today. I'll share my screen so we can get this clearly on board here. And so we'll move into this introduction of what we mean by next economies. And Sandra Waddock, who's been looking at next economies from a values perspective, will describe what we mean by this. So the basic idea is that we do have next economies emerging around the world. So these next economies are often fragmented. They have various names, such as regenerative economy, circular economy, buen vivir economy, the common good economy, social purpose business, sustainable economy. And I presume actually that all of us are working in that direction in various capacities. So that's what we're interested in accelerating the development of. So we're going to look at this concept of infrastructure with these great panelists that we have here with 4 examples, because the concept itself is a bit theoretical, but we can see these examples emerging at this time in our own development in the midst of the traditional economy. And so what we mean when we refer to infrastructure for next economies is these things that we don't even think about as having design features, that there's certain values designed into them. So we don't usually think of currency, for example, as being designed to support a certain power structure or a certain set of values, etc. Stock markets, oh, that's just an mechanism for aggregating money and dispersing money. How is that actually reflecting different values? And probably with indicators and metrics, it's become a bit more obvious because people think about ESG indicators, social output indicators, etc. But in general, we have these different types of economic activity that are supported by what we call infrastructure. And this is a generic category, but embedded in the infrastructure are certain value systems. So our question is how to integrate the next economy's values into this infrastructure. And we'll be looking at some examples here today. But first, let's turn it over to Sandra Waddock, and she can introduce the concept of what do we mean by next economy's values. Whoops, you're on mute, Sandra.
Sorry about that. So yes, as Steve said, what we're interested in the Bounce Beyond project, and I think in Catalyst 2030 as well, are values and principles that support the next economy. So what might those values be? Well, I've been doing some work to think about different kinds of values. I'm going to unpack these a little bit in a minute, but I recently published an article talking about framing economics around life, arguing in the article that we need not just to think about environmental economics or feminist economics, but we really need a whole new economic orthodoxy that's based on a different set of principles than the current neoliberal economics that really dominates our world today, which argues that people are self-interested maximizers, that the only purpose of the firm is to maximize shareholder wealth, that constant growth is a wonderful thing in a finite world, what we know to be a finite world, and that the only purpose of the firm is to make a profit, among other values. So we need to shift towards economics that value what gives life to our systems. So I reviewed a huge amount of literature and came up with 6 concepts, precepts that to me represent a core set of values. And you see them listed here. I'll talk a little bit more about each of them. Stewardship of the whole, co-creating collective value, governing through what's called cosmopolitan-localism, principles of values of regeneration, reciprocity, and circularity, which really come right out of indigenous cultures. The idea, building in the idea of relationship and connectedness and equitable markets and trades. Now, what these try to do is build in the idea of the impacts that economic activities have on our societies and our natural environment, which are completely ignored in neoliberalism. So let's just think about a little bit about what each of these means. So stewardship of the whole. Typically, in Western culture, we typically fragment things into the smallest part that we can think about, the atom if we're studying nuclear physics, or the individual business or the individual household if we're thinking about economics. But really, we have to think about the whole system. So the idea of stewardship, the value of stewardship of the whole, is to think about the whole system, that people have responsibilities not just for the parts that are in our systems, but that when in living systems, there's a wholeness that gives that needs to be sustained, or we're actually killing the organism, and in this case, the society or the economy or the natural environment. So that means taking care for the long term. It means taking care for the global commons, another concept that's completely left out of neoliberal economics, and emphasizing care for individuals by individuals for both the local and the global. So not just one or the other, but both. So it's kind of a both and type of logic. And in doing that, we need to shift away from financial wealth and financial profitability as the only metric that we're concerned about, because really, if we think about sort of the bigger picture, we are all, as my friend David Corton says, we are living beings born of a living planet, and we forget that at our peril. So the ground on which we live, the very earth, is the foundation of our societies, which are the foundation in turn of our economies. It's not the other way around. Our economies are a subset of our societies, which in turn are a subset of the natural environment. So in order to do well by the natural environment and by the fact and to foster a living planet orientation, living system orientation, we need to think about how we create collective value. The idea of collective value comes from a great article by Thomas Donaldson and Jim Walsh, who argue that the purpose of the business is to do just that, absent dignity violations. So the purpose of businesses in this new economic orthodoxy, should it ever come to be, would be to optimize collective value and well-being for all human beings and all other beings, not just human beings. In other words, we humans need to learn to live in harmony and balance and within the regenerative capacities of the natural environment, and bring wealth back to its original meaning of well-being, prosperity, and health, as opposed to what John Ruskin called the ilth that our get and gain philosophies seem to often lead us towards these days. The idea of governance through cosmopolitan-localism means that we want to devolve decision-making to the lowest feasible level, to local levels where it's feasible. Not always, but sometimes, and much of the time, decisions are best made by the people who are affected by them. So that ideas and exchange of knowledge and skills and technology are being fomented and developed at the local level, and that there's a reciprocal relationship between what's going on locally and what's going on at the global level, because we all know we're in a globally connected world now, and that's not likely to disappear anytime soon. But the basic principle here is following the subsidiarity principle, pushing decisions to where the people making them are most affected by them. The idea of regenerativeness, reciprocity, and circularity, regeneration, reciprocity, and circularity, I've draw this right from principles that indigenous wisdom gives us. Regeneration means that we're using the Earth's resources within their capacity, not exceeding them as we currently are doing. I mean, some estimates say that for everybody in the planet to live the way we in the United States live now would take 5 planets, the resources of 5 planets. We don't have 5 planets, we have only 1 planet. So we have to we change our ways, basically. Reciprocity means there's an exchange or trade that's mutually beneficial between us human beings and other beings in the world. And it's based on that whole systems, the stewardship of the whole perspective that I talked about earlier. The idea of circularity, we've all heard about the circular economy. In it, that is based on the principle that nothing, there's no such thing as waste, because everything is out there in the system somewhere. It's all in the system, and so waste equals food. So what's waste? The idea of that comes from the idea of the book called Cradle to Cradle, which argues that what's waste for one system should become food for another system. In other words, we shouldn't be producing toxic wastes in our production processes or in our living systems. And that we're developing towards abundancy and diversity and healthy ecosystems. I think I just... the next principle is relationship and connectedness. We are human beings who are social creatures by definition. We need connection, we need care, we need relationship. And we are, as I said earlier, integrally connected to nature. And the final principle is that of equitable markets and trade, which means not just free markets, but markets that are actually fair to all their participants, where goods and services are fully costed, which is not what's happening now. In other words, we would be in this kind of a market, we would be internalizing all the costs that it really takes to produce something, instead of quote unquote externalizing them as current economics does. So that was a paper that I presented. And then I'm also participating, as Steve is, in this Global Assessment for a New Economics, or GANE. And we're just coming forward, we're just doing some analysis now, and have identified 10 principles. And I want to just briefly talk about these 10 principles, present them briefly, that come out of a vast literature on economics. So acknowledge that economics are embedded in societies and ecosystems. I've already talked about that a little bit. And that economics has a socio-ecological purpose. Recognize that economies have fundamental biophysical and biochemical limits to growth. In other words, you can't grow endlessly. Recognize that human-derived capital depends on nature. Embed a positive understanding of freedom based on well-being and dignity in all economic thinking, decisions, and actions. In other words, this is about human dignity and well-being. That's what economies are meant to do. It's not just about wealth, financial wealth, and money, making money typically for the already wealthy. Consider economic questions as questions of equity and justice. Interesting, building that fairness principle right into the economics. Taking a social and relational approach to valuation that supports enfranchisement, social needs, and the common good. So that building back the idea of common good into economics. Embedding participation, deliberation, collaboration, and reciprocity as core to economic thinking. Again, I had the principle in my paper about regenerative and reciprocity and circularity, and this principle reflects that. Designing economies to be regenerative and circle, explicitly about that. And emphasizing a post-capitalist and decolonial perspective. In other words, building on making sure that every voice can be heard, not just the people in elite societies. And stressing interdisciplinarity and the need to tackle complexity. So looking at those principles, which are coming directly from the GANE project, and Simone Martino has been doing this analysis under the leadership of Jasper Kenter at the University of York in the UK to do this. I thought, what if we tried to put these principles together with what I had done? And so I came up with a little diagram here. So if we think about stewardship of the whole, that really stresses the interdisciplinarity and the need to tackle complexity. That builds on recognizing fundamental biophysical and biogeochemical limits to growth. So those principles support that value of stewardship of the whole. The co-creative collective value, well, the principle of embedding a positive understanding of freedom based on well-being and dignity in economics, that supports that value. And the cosmo-localism, taking a socio-relational approach, supporting enfranchisement, that everybody has voice, needs, and the common good. That's the localism. Embedding participation, deliberation, and collaboration and reciprocity. Again, you know, it's a judgment call where you put these things, but this one seems to support cosmo-localism to me. And the principles of regenerativity, recognize that human-derived capital depends on nature. That's that we are born of a living planet idea again. Designing economies to be regenerative and circular, that's pretty explicit. And acknowledging the the idea of relationality and connectedness, acknowledging the embeddedness of our economies in socio-ecological systems, seems to me to be directly supportive of that. And finally, the equitable markets and trades. Consider equity and justice in economics. That principle relates to that. And emphasize a post-capitalist and decolonial perspective. That's giving voice and power and I guess I'd call it enfranchisement to everyone in the world who are producing products and goods, so that they're getting fair return for their work. So these values and principles take a living systems perspective. And I would argue that we need, this is what the GANE Principle Project is also arguing. We need a new core logic that for arguing for economics, that based on not what gives money to the wealthy or makes more money for companies, but what gives life to our socioeconomic systems. So it's about changing the narrative of economics and favoring wealth in its original meaning of well-being and prosperity, and avoiding the ilth that's associated today with what we can see of the huge problems that many of you are trying to deal with, climate change, the pandemic, many ecosystem sustainability issues, and undignified and inhumane treatment of people and animals in the interests of ever pursuing profits. And it would help us, doing so would help us better cope with what we've all created, which is the Anthropocene. So thank you. There, I will stop sharing and turn it back to Steve.
Thanks so much, Sandra. Sandra's observed these principles and values from actually looking at what people are doing in different parts of the world. For instance, in Costa Rica, one of the people we're working with is Edward Muller, who has started something called Costa Rica Regenerativa, and it's a national strategy to transform the country, and it's supported by the government as well, to be able to transform the economy into one that has these types of values. So to be able to do that, though, requires redesigning the core parts of our economy. So there's probably nothing that's more central to the economy than money. And so I'm going to ask Sydney if she would come forward to describe a very unique sort of approach to redesigning money with these values in mind. Sydney, please.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Sandra. Wow, what an amazing introduction to seeds. I feel like you're a part of the seeds and Hypha ecosystem already. You didn't even know it. So I'm going to present this slide. Where's the present button? I feel computer illiterate right now.
It's up top right.
Top right.
Oh, you guys are blocking it with your beautiful faces. Okay. Nice. So again, it is so wonderful to be here with you all. You are all catalysts for action using your gifts to regenerate, and it is a blessing to be on with you today. So to summarize just briefly before I dive into it, Seeds is a cryptocurrency designed to regenerate the planet. And before I share some of the details, I wanted to make note of why I am involved in this, which is really when the pandemic hit, I was an event planner. I was providing event spaces and services for catalysts for action for social impact entrepreneurs, educators, visual and performing artists, holistic practitioners. And I was like, what am I going to do now? I felt deep hopelessness. And then I connected to Mark and Stephen, who are on this slide here, who actually built this slide and have been a big part of my seeds journey. And I felt inspired and fell in love with the utopic story of seeds. And I particularly felt very motivated to educate people on how to nourish themselves, sustain themselves, take care of themselves through getting their hands dirty, growing their own food, building their own shelter. And when I learned about seeds, I thought it would be a perfect mechanism to do what I wanted to, which was spread this kind of education. So I developed an idea called permatours, which is a regenerative tour across New England, where myself and organizers that I work with are going to different properties, homesteads, sustainable hubs to teach on radical self-reliance, survival training, growing your own food, building your own shelter, and basically doing it in community and with love as the core intention. And so seeds was something that I felt could really ground this tour, and I decided to get involved in the system and put in a proposal to generate seeds that I'd then distribute and we would use. So now I'm going to explain how this works. So as you can see here, it says our environment, our economies, and our communities. Welcome to a movement for movements, providing tools, systems, and support for all of us to co-create a thriving world. And in Stephen, my mentor's words, this is the greatest quantum leap in imagination we could have ever imagined, because even 5 years ago, we couldn't have imagined a currency that would regenerate our planet and motivate regenerative behaviors. And that's exactly what it does. So instead of being more profitable, we reward the regeneration of our planet using algorithms within the platform, incentivizing collaborative and regenerative behaviors and activities for the well-being of the whole. We're co-creating a new world. We're regenerators and change agents, and we're partners and collaborators. And as you can see, I'm not sure if you can see the numbers here on this slide, but we're in over 88 countries and 6 continents, have over 200 citizens, over 300 residents, and almost 5,000 regenerators using the wallet. And there are over 450 partner organizations and over 55 projects being funded by seeds, hopefully including permatours. Here's a short clip that will give you a
While most of us dream of recreating a cleaner, greener, and more beautiful world, the financial system has very different priorities. It relies on infinite exploitation to feed a dream of endless growth. In reality, though, our lives depend on one planet with finite resources. And with that planet in the midst of a climate crisis, this disconnect between our financial system and our ecosystem is one we can no longer afford. Seeds offers a solution, a movement that allows us to share financial success, distribute value fairly, and move towards the common vision of a thriving civilization. Seeds gives humanity the tools to reimagine what money can be and do. A financial ecosystem designed to regenerate our planet. Seeds, all uppercase, is the ecosystem's name, and Seeds, capital S, is its currency. One that's already rewarding the people and organizations creating a healthier, more equal, and abundant world. Seeds uses cutting-edge technology aimed at creating a more healthy and stable economy, and there are no fees for using it. In fact, the more you exchange, the more value you help create. Value that Seeds reinvests in the planet via grants to community projects, regenerative businesses, and movements. Better still, as the value of Seeds grows, it flows to all members of the Seeds ecosystem, not based on wealth, but on how much they contribute to healing the planet and shaping Seeds itself. That's right, Seeds is a true democracy that lets us all own the change we want to see in the world. Finally, a financial system by the people, for the people, to regenerate our planet.
Yes, let's do this.
And And feel free to ask any questions in the chat while I go through this, because Mark and Stephen are experts and they can answer all the questions that you have. So the people's conscious currency, why join this economic renaissance? There are no transaction fees. This is intended to heal our planet with every single purchase and sale. You can have a direct voice in the governance or vote on how these seeds are used and distributed, earn grants for regenerative initiatives like the one that I mentioned earlier, and earn an income and revenue for participating. So who is behind Seeds? It's owned by no one, designed for everyone. For it to be a truly decentralized financial and political system, the organization behind it needs to be decentralized. For this reason, Seeds is co-created by Hypha, a software company, together with the Seeds community. Hypha DHO is a global, transparent, open organization that is owned by all who contribute and open to all. Anyone, yes, that includes you, can contribute to this and get paid for doing so. To see the members behind Seeds, how this all works, and to co-create with us, come explore the Hypha.DAO, D-H-O. Hypha is a radically transparent organism. So for that reason, anyone can see our financial dashboard. And DHO stands for Decentralized Human Organization. So this graphic helps to explain Hypha and Seeds. Hypha is the software company that develops decentralized applications like Seeds, and Seeds has a bio-regional focus where we connect, communicate, and coordinate. So you can see on the left here that we have regions throughout the world that are actually on the platform, actual eco-villages who have bought into the ecosystem, who have different skills, resources, assets that can live on a marketplace where people can use their seeds to trade and exchange. And then on the right, you see Hypha. The focus is work, play, learn. And it is designed an incredible, you can see there's developers, architects, designers, engineers, storytellers who are putting energy and life into Seeds. As you can see here on the bottom, it lists some of the key elements, which are proposals like the one I mentioned. Permatours was a formal proposal that I submitted, which is actually open for voting right now by the Seeds citizens. Then there are roles, or individuals who play a role in the ecosystem, circles who gather to co-create, contributions, assignments, quests, claims. 80 to 20 decisions means that 20% of the citizens of Seeds need to vote on a proposal for it to pass, and then 80% of that 20% need to agree in order for a proposal to pass. Tokens are the Seeds itself, what's allocated. Unity is core to what we're doing. We're a unified ecosystem coming together to regenerate. There's quorums and badges for those who have created or who have done work to further this initiative. And then there are budgets allocated, as well as milestones that individuals or organizations must hit in order for seeds to be given to them. This is a graphic that explains how Hypha, the software company, works. You can see that there's different actual physical locations utilizing the Seeds ecosystem and taking part. There are citizens, proposals, study groups, teams. I'm actually a part of the Ambassador Academy right now, so I'm working with other Seeds ambassadors to learn more about the tokenomics, how the system works, how seeds are minted, how the community works together. And you can see here just a breakdown of the different facets. We're people coming together using our gifts. We're catalysts for action with different initiatives, goals, where we can help each other. Practices or certain principles that help us to function and build together. And then there's different places and regions, like I mentioned. I'm actually hopefully attending an event in Ecuador at the end of the year, as there's an actual eco-village there that's participating in seeds and using seeds to trade and exchange for materials and food. Here you can see some of the individuals that are involved who are actively building inside the seeds ecosystem. You can see some of these individuals' names who I personally know. Rain is actually leading my Ambassador Academy. You can see the percentage that she's been endorsed or vouched, and you can see the percentage of which she's been voting, or she's had people vote for her different proposals. And this is just a wheel to demonstrate some of the key why elements. So regenerative living, education, healing, investing, farming, recycling. And here shows our intention for our growth over time. And as you can see in the top right corner, governance operating at different scales, organizational, bioregional, societal, and different scopes. So seeds, Hypha, CR, etc. The decentralized human organization with its key functions of the DAO are decentralized payroll and contribution accounting. So what contribution accounting means is that everyone does have a fair voice and an ability to vote and contribute once they're a citizen and they graduate to becoming a citizen based on their interaction with the tool. However, contribution accounting means that those who have taken a large part or a large role spreading seeds, supporting others with understanding the ecosystem and how to take part, they actually have a greater voting power. So you're rewarded based on your input and based on your output in seeds by having a greater decision-making power when it's time to vote on proposals and campaigns. And so our hope is to facilitate a next step conversation with Catalyst 2030. Obviously, what Catalyst 2030 is doing is heavily connected to the spirit and intention of seeds. So a lot of the initiatives and organizations that are a part of Catalyst could tap into the seeds ecosystem and create campaigns and proposals where they can raise seeds to then fund and fuel their projects. So I mentioned Permatours, the regenerative tour that I'm doing throughout the New England area and really the Northeast region of the United States. Every single host or farmer opening up their land for us to stay and learn, every single organizer, educator, entertainer, facilitator will earn seeds for their contributions. Every guest and volunteer will earn seeds for what they did to help the homestead or to help the farm. So it's a clear demonstration of seeds being put to work. And the hope is too that even before we actually attend each property, that will actually know what the hosts need and what the guests and organizers and contributors can bring. So we'll have a marketplace of resources and assets to use as a part of this experience to trade and exchange while we're on tour and then way beyond the tour itself. And that's the gist. Thank you guys so much for listening. I really appreciate you, and I'll pass it back over to Steve.
Thank you so much, Sid. So you can see that these values that Sandra referred to are reflected in what Sid was talking about, the whole systems approach, the regeneration, circularity, etc. So I'd like to just say that this is a cryptocurrency, but unlike other cryptocurrencies, it's not for Wall Street's benefit, and it's not controlled by this narrow group of people who are speculating in order to make money. There's certain designs in place that will ensure that that does not happen, without going into the details right now because we have to move along. I would like to invite Fredrik to speak with you about some really wonderful work, in the metric area. How do we ensure that we are getting the impact that we want? How do we ensure that communities are actually the beneficiaries rather than looking at these big corporations and focusing upon them? So Fredrik, thank you so much. Would you share some of your really path-breaking true footprint approach?
Thank you so much, Steve. Thanks for hosting us, and thanks for these wonderful presentations we've just had. I'm looking forward to the next ones as well. Sandra, I love the framing that you provided with these values, because indeed we have to challenge the values of the current system, and it's incumbent to populate them with new ones. Of course, then the question comes, so what does this mean, right? How do we operationalize this? What does this mean in terms of business behavior, of course, community practices, and financial products? And so the approach that we are taking at True Footprint, which is the culmination of work that I've been doing in two seemingly unrelated areas before with my co-founders. I don't have a presentation ready for you here. So I'm a social entrepreneur, have been a social entrepreneur for a couple of decades, and I joined Transparency International, the anti-corruption organization, as its first employee and was its head of research. And there, the thing that kept me busy was how to measure stuff that people struggle to measure, which was then corruption and international bribery. And then moving on to the next organization I founded, which was called Integrity Action, and it was about measuring integrity and governance. And of course, now seeing what value we can bring to the measurement of sustainability and impact. I feel that many more people are working on than what I was working on before, but nonetheless, there are some real challenges around that. And the second theme to my career, in a way, for if one can call that a career, but is around engaging large numbers of people to be change makers. My second co-founder comes actually from the financial industry, and my third co-founder from the development of computer products and software, and having done that at considerable scale. So both of them in their respective areas have worked at great scale. And what we're concerned about is a very simple proposition at its core, which I think is very much aligned, Sandra, with the values you put forward, but is putting people at the center of the change. That people have to be the owners of the outcomes that they are meant to benefit from. And that sounds almost trite, right? It sounds so straightforward. But one of the implications of that is that they also have to be able to produce the data that is meant to showcase the journey that they're on as communities, as business owners, as employees. And what you have in the current model of data. So I'm going to start with what we're doing on data, and then share a little bit what we're doing in terms of working on some new financial products. But data is rather key to this. How do we know the extent to which the values you have outlined, Sandra, how do we know whether we're on the right track? And so, Sid, what you highlighted to me is, in a way, yes, a way of validating this within a community, right? Giving each other a recognition in one form or another. But I do want to go one level beyond that in terms of what is the data. Not everything can be measured, not everything that matters can be measured, but a great deal more needs to be measured. It needs to be far more granular than has been the case until now. So what if we look back at the efforts to change, for example, supply chains, farming supply chains, international supply chains, we've had various efforts, and Ned knows this better than I do in many ways, but we've had a certification model. And so one of the leading parameters or paradigms in terms of this has been fair trade, right? Giving certificates for efforts to address certain things. And there are now hundreds of certificates. Some, they're coming up almost like ICOs, right? Yeah, new cryptocurrencies. Well, before that, there were many certificates. And unfortunately, like many cryptocurrencies, some of them are indeed, not worth a whole lot. They're speculative, we could say. But so the problem here is that certificates are binary. You either have it or you don't. And it's a top-down model, right? No one self-certifies. Well, if they self-certify, we certainly wouldn't believe them, right? In most cases. But even then, they're binary and they don't produce data. If they produce data on outputs but not on outcomes and impact. So if you look, for example, at why fair trade exists, it exists for a number of reasons: to reduce extreme poverty, to be more regenerative, for example, use less exploitative practices, eliminate child labor, etc. There are good 10 reasons why fair trade exists. If you look at the impact reporting done by the major fair trade organizations, what you will find is output data on the number of farmers they work with, the amount of money they have returned through the premium, perhaps the number of flowers, the number of products, the amount of sales. But where's the data in relation to the issues for which fair trade was set up in the first place? And you will unfortunately not find it because they don't produce it. And so it's very difficult to assess the extent to which this standard is on the journey towards change. That observation holds true, unfortunately, for the other major standards. FSC, MSC, BCI, right? Very often three-letter acronyms, and they're covering everything from palm oil to sugar to cotton, etc. The unfortunate underlying reality is that they, unfortunately, in many cases, cannot really demonstrate that it is contributing to a step change in the sustainability of these supply chains, in their regenerative nature, etc. And now, what if there was a bottom-up model? So, the difference here is very simple. When you have a top-down model, if there was a way of generating granular data, meaning locally specific, and doing so on an ongoing basis with a top-down model, they would be doing it. These are not bad people. They want the change to happen, but they are not able to do so with a top-down model. Think about it differently. If you're a small business owner and you're not allowed to produce your own management accounts, someone else has to come around every 12 to 18 months to tell you how much money you made. Because otherwise no one would believe you. You would not be able to run a business that way. But the current certification model doesn't allow for a method wherein people are able to generate their own data. And so they have no responsibility. They're not trusted in any sense. So what we do at True Footprint is to have the methods that enable people at the community level to be able to generate verifiable data on what is going on at a granular level. And where we are doing this, the way this works, so if you were to ask people straight up, how many children do you employ on your farm and how many banned pesticides do you use, you're probably not going to get very useful data coming out of it. You're not, simply not, right? So it's not about simply self-reporting. That's not going to generate anything particularly useful. But what we have innovated in True Footprint is the ability for people to problem solve the issues they care about, track the journey on which they are able to address these issues, share their innovations among their peers. And through that process, we're able to source the people who are really making change happen on the ground. So we're applying this in an unexpected way in the context of the COVID pandemic. We're live now in 27 countries, with helping frontline healthcare workers and patients reporting on compliance with safety standards at healthcare facilities, with access to medication, and now in terms of safety protocols for vaccination. What we find is we're able to generate a much higher quality of data, which is real time, which is granular down to the facility level, bottom up, than any of the health authorities we're talking to are able to generate top down. They have tried to produce data, some of them top down. They cannot do it in a reliable, regular way. But when it's being done by people who are interested in making sure that they have these safety precautions in place, we're generating this data on a continuous basis. The same logic is being applied with smallholder farmers we're working with, who are sharing in real time the innovations they're implementing as to how they're implementing good agricultural practices. This is being shared among cooperatives, networks of farmers. This is completely pre-competitive, right? And through that, we're able to track and generate the data on exactly what is happening on the ground. And the most advanced, the super monitors, the change makers among them, who are really able to make changes happen, both in terms of their agronomic practices, but also in terms of public goods like health access, are the people we then entrust and pay to be engaged in some of the more challenging issues in their communities. And then we're also, we got a contract recently to do this in the context of education. And the logic is exactly the same each time. It's engaging and entrusting the people with the most at stake. And those are the teachers, but they're also the parents and they're the children, right? They're the youth, to engage them in taking ownership of better educational outcomes. Now, I'll just mention a couple of the financial products that we're working with that are then using the data that we are able to generate. And we're not the only data source. Obviously, this can be triangulated in some cases with satellite data. In other cases, there are sensors that can be used. But ultimately, whatever other technologies, remote sensing you have, and including artificial intelligence, if people don't own the change, if they are not the drivers of it, you cannot achieve a step change in impact. You can't achieve resilience. And so that's fundamentally the systems change that we're seeking to contribute to. And so one of these is a financial product that is based on contingent payments being guaranteed by major brands, actually, interested in ensuring that their supply chains are more regenerative. And so it is engaging those brands that are interested in making that step change from a certification model, which used to be perfectly satisfactory to most of them. They could simply say that 50%, 80%, or 100% of X cotton, you can replace it with soy and whatever else is coming from this certified source. There is a growing group of companies that know that this is simply not satisfactory. It's not about what they can sell to their consumers. It's not guaranteeing the resiliency, the sustainability of their supply chain. So here there is a positive thing happening where it's now a shift towards real impacts, real change towards regeneration, moving again from certification to real data. And then there is an effort we're involved with, which is to engage with private equity. Private equity doesn't always have the best reputation. In fact, private equity, for example, the recent deal by a private equity to buy a BP's assets in Alaska is a way for, in this case, to forego and to ensure that they don't have to report, right, on the environmental performance of those assets. But leaving that aside, there is nonetheless private equity is very significant. And they have the opportunity there to be investing in companies that are not actually having to report to the same standards of public listed companies, which, by the way, is not the highest standard. Yeah, this is not a race to the top, unfortunately. And so private equity that is interested in sustainability has the opportunity over the period of their holding to ensure that the companies in their portfolios are actually best in class, not just financially, but also in terms of sustainability. And so there is the second area where we're seeing a real opening in terms of making systems change happening, unexpected to me in a way that there is perhaps a greater opportunity for us, at least, working with private companies than with public ones. And yeah, very happy to go into any of that if you're interested. Thanks again, Steve, for bringing us together.
Thanks so much, Fredrik. Well, you're a good bridge between Sid and Ned as our next presenter. Ned, we've had some of these conversations with topic that Fredrik was just discussing, but today I would like you to focus specifically upon a new type of organizing approach. So we've had a a currency approach. We've had a new economies metrics approach. And there's something that's happening in seafood that is in contradiction to the competition imperative, or it's working with it in a very different way. And I'd like to invite Ned Daly to be able to share some of that with you.
Thank you, Steve. Let me, uh-oh. There we go. I had the same problem as Sid, I think. There we go. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about seafood. As Steve mentioned, pre-competitive collaboration is kind of a structural innovation that's a structure for innovation. And it's become very effective in the seafood industry because, as you can see, it's a fairly complicated industry. This is international trade of seafood, making it very, very challenging to deal with a lot of issues that don't show up in these lines, like slave labor and forced labor and lack of governance and overfishing and illegal fishing, which have huge impacts both on oceans and ocean-dependent or seafood-dependent communities. So even though it's a very complicated and sometimes very destructive industry, it's a very important industry because it can have a very, very positive impact on the sustainability of global food systems. So as you can see here, the amount of inputs it takes to create outputs in seafood is much more efficient than any other protein. And if we were able to include non-fed aquaculture like oysters, mussels, or clams, they're one of the most sustainable proteins, including plant-based proteins on the planet. So we have something that has a lot of bad practices in it right now, but can be one of the most sustainable contributors to our global food system. So we need to figure out how we can clean it up. And one of the most effective ways that has been happening, I would say, over the last 10 years is through pre-competitive collaborations in seafood. So one of the big challenges facing all companies and all industries, not just seafood, is how to be ambidextrous, how to exploit the existing business conditions while also exploring future opportunities. Because that exploration exercise is becoming more complex and complicated, it's becoming more expensive for companies. So pre-competitive collaboration really isn't a new idea. It's been happening in industries like pharmaceuticals for 20 or 30 years, but there's been an increased focus to use the model on sustainability issues, especially in resource-focused sectors like seafood, coffee, cocoa, a number of others. And pre-competitive platforms really become the opportunity for seafood companies to work together and explore some of these new opportunities, some of the issues that we're talking about here, or kind of some more basic changes to supply chains, while sharing the resources and costs of that exploration. So it's a very good business model to advance sustainable innovation, which not only would be expensive for companies, but as you saw, because of the complexity of the industry, it just becomes impossible for a single company to act on any of these issues. So there's basically three types of collaboration that have developed in seafood. The first is really a traditional pain point driven collaboration. So here in the United States, blue crab is kind of a big regional food that people really appreciate, mostly on the East Coast, but it's been essentially fished out here in the US. So the market moved to Indonesia, where they have a blue swimming crab very similar to the East Coast crab. As soon as that market moved to Indonesia, the pressure on that fishery was significant, started to get fished out, and became a problem for the industry because they weren't going to have assured supply of that product. So they created a mechanism called the Fishery Improvement Project, which is basically an organization like WWF works with fishermen on the ground, teaches them how to fish sustainably, don't take crabs with eggs on them, only fish in certain areas or certain parts of the year. And if they complied with that, the companies would continue to buy from those fisheries. So you had kind of the symbiotic relationship between the economic drivers and the conservation initiatives working together, creating a sustainable fishery and assured supply for the industry. And all of the traditional pain point models in seafood kind of follow that model in terms of addressing the lack of management in that example I just made. Another pre-competitive collaboration deals with the lack of governance in tuna fisheries, because tuna crosses so many different oceans and regions and countries. There's kind of no central governance, which equates to a lack of governance. An incredible challenge to take on, but the industry felt like they had to do it in order to get a continued sustainable supply of tuna. Similarly, but kind of on the other side of the marketplace or supply chain, the Sustainable Seafood Coalition was trying to address a lack of coherence in markets. So every company was asking for a different set of sustainability criteria. And if you're a small oyster producer in Peru, there's no way you can access all those markets. You can't prove to every store or company that you're following their criteria. You kind of have to pick your market. So it was creating a real pinch point in the marketplace. So these are really kind of self-interest, pain point driven collaborations, but because seafood, you have assured supply and sustainability equate so closely, you also have reduced risk in the supply chain and good labor practices equate so closely. There's a lot of economic incentives to address sustainability interests. The second model is innovation adoption across collaborations, and this takes place in a couple different ways. Sustainable Fisheries Partnership is looking to use that fishery improvement project model and extend it beyond just the innovators and early adopters in the industry. So they're targeting 75% of the total industry to come under these sustainable practices, which again is a benefit for those fisheries, but also helps the industry because you're moving everybody together. You're not having some people out front paying a lot of the cost to innovate, and then a lot of people follow. You're trying to move everybody together. GSSI was an initiative that was trying to get clarity around certification in the marketplace, and some of the issues or challenges that Fredrik was talking about are definitely true in seafood and have created a big challenge for engagement around sustainable practices. So that's an example where companies could have kind of taken on these efforts on their own, They could have done an assessment of credible programs and tried to differentiate the marketplace, but they felt like the bigger value there was to do this kind of in a public open source way, so that again, you could get kind of a bigger shift in the industry. Finally, the global dialogue on seafood traceability, that's a mechanism to get kind of key data elements and adoption of better traceability and transparency measures throughout the industry, not just looking for a small segment of seafood, but really transform the industry and how it uses its supply chains. The last model is kind of the most interesting one, which is really focused on where can we have the most impact, not what's our biggest problem or how do we get adoption for the industry, but where can we make the most change? And so CBOS is a model and a program that was developed by the Stockholm Resilience Center using their Keystone Species model. So you get kind of the most influential actors to act on a problem, and you'll have the greatest impact. So CBOS brought together 10 biggest companies in seafood in their sector and said, okay, we've got a lot of purchasing power in the room. How do we affect issues like illegal fishing or forced labor? So it was a very different model and not necessarily economic driven, but really just trying to create change in the industry. Similarly, CPACT, which is an organization made up of middle of supply chain actors. So kind of the ones that hear it from both sides. Retailers are telling them, we need these types of criteria covered in our purchasing policies. And the fishermen are telling them, we have all of these other challenges that we have to deal with. So folks in the middle of the supply chain said, let's figure out a way where we can really start to address some of the gaps and opportunities. Again, not focusing on specific challenges that they're facing, but those issues where they'll get the most traction or the most impact. They can be very small, exploratory projects, or they can also be fairly large in terms of helping move the industry. But really the focus is, where can we make the most change? So how this model is improving seafood, as I said before, kind of that ambidextrous challenge that companies have. They're not kind of just finishing one business model, the old business model, and taking up the new business model. Both exist at the same time. And to steal a concept from Steve Waddell, it's a little bit like twin strands of DNA. The old model is supporting the development of the new model, and the new model's creating income to kind of support the company through the transition. So the entire seafood industry is going through a similar transition with that similar twin strands of DNA, where there are old systems still in place, opaque supply chains, but they coexist with blockchain and global dialogue for seafood traceability that are creating more transparency and traceability in the industry. And what these pre-competitive collaborations are doing is they support, through research and development, innovation, adoption, and alignment, the transition of both businesses and the entire sector to a more sustainable economy. So it's kind of a simple approach, but it has had a very big impact in an industry where impact can be very, very difficult to come by. So I will leave it there.
Thanks so much, Ned. A great example, organizing in new ways, of finding that it's not just a question of trying to be a monopoly or trying to organize to create lack of competition so you can profit from it, but there's actual social benefit, and how can we generate that through models that are both competitive and collaborative. For our next example and last example, I'm very excited to share with you what Tomas Carruthers has been doing. He's been taking leadership in this area which is considered central to the traditional capitalism in the stock market. And he has a vision, and there are examples of how this capitalist instrument can be used for actually the world and the values that we're looking for. Tomas, welcome. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Steve, and greetings from Edinburgh in Scotland. And may I say it's a particular pleasure to follow a man talking about seafood, which is so important to the Scottish economy on the East Coast and the West Coast. So thank you very much, Ned. But thank you also to Sandra for setting out the principles early on in this discussion. And I must say that now, with some terror after Sid Griffith's presentation, I'm going to try and move to give you a few slides. Please excuse me. And maybe it's not going to work. I think it's the old thing, Steve, about opening the slide deck.
Is the share screen working? Do you want to send it to me and I can share it for you?
Maybe I'll just speak to them, given that it's 5 minutes. So I take it that we all start from the perspective, I think we share two very, very strong principles here. One of them is that we can use the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals as a globally shared objective, and that we all want to achieve them, and that achieving them is, in the context of the COVID pandemic, even harder than it was before, and it was before a very, very great challenge. But let's start with the Sustainable Development Goals and the index that they provide for achievement across different parts of the global economy. And I think the second thing that we probably all agree on, that isn't contentious, is that in the context of Catalyst 2030's work, social entrepreneurship is going to be the thing that makes the difference. I come from a world of, well, the capital markets as an entrepreneur. And I can tell you that when I started working on the idea of a social stock exchange 10 years ago, first of all, no one got it. And secondly, I was insulted. If being called a communist is an insult, maybe it's not, but it was certainly clear that no one wanted to engage with the idea of a social stock exchange. So things have changed in the capital markets, but they're changing very slowly. They're changing through what's called the adoption of ESG, environmental, social, and governance concerns. And ESG, I have to say, is a burgeoning industry in London and Wall Street, and in Singapore and Shanghai. But ESG is not going to get us where we need to go, because ESG is about risk mitigation on existing assets. Have we correctly priced existing assets? What I'm proposing is something slightly different, which is the creation of a new stock exchange, a social stock exchange, that will encourage the listing of businesses founded by social entrepreneurs and allowing social entrepreneurs to continue to control them. So let's take the social entrepreneurs challenge, which is the SDGs, 2.53 trillion US dollars a year until 2030. Let's look at how listed public markets with a valuation of about $90 trillion can be adapted to use their capital for socially valuable purposes. And here in Edinburgh, what we're doing is building a stock exchange. It's a stock exchange, it's not crowdfunding. Crowdfunding is a worthy undertaking, but it's not going to scale. Fredrik mentioned private equity. I'm very happy to pick up on private equity with Fredrik later, but private equity by itself is also not going to scale. Public fixed income and public equity is the only asset class in the world that has the depth to be able to scale to meet the challenge. But the problem is that these markets are not currently really available to social entrepreneurs. And there's a whole set of analysis why. I'm just going to look at two of them. One of them is that caring about purpose and about social impact almost disqualifies you from admission. Saying that you have a theory of change and a purpose almost disqualifies you from admission to the markets as they're currently constructed. What we say is that having a theory of change and a purpose is the reason why you should come to a public market. We will be the only stock exchange in the world that requires you to have a purpose articulated at board level and published, and a theory of change that explains how you use your business to achieve an intervention for specific beneficiaries with a measurable impact. None of that to this audience is going to sound very strange, but to a public capital markets audience, it sounds very strange indeed. So that's why you need a new venue. Steve and other speakers have suggested that there's something important going on with stock exchanges, as well as with currencies, as well as with measurement. And the important thing is this: they're all places and venues and methods by which capital gets allocated. There are lots of kinds of capital. We normally agree that there are at least 5. And we probably agree that 4 of them are mispriced. Financial capital, money, is the one that markets focus on, but natural capital, social capital, biodiversity, and others tend to be mispriced. By creating a social stock exchange, we enable repricing to occur, and hopefully in the medium term, that will also be to the value of social entrepreneurs who, in our world, go from being, if you like, the problem child of the capital markets to being the center of the capital markets, able to control and continue to own their businesses, able to continue making the interventions that they set out to do, able to report and interact in the community. And it's a global community of other actors and other supporters and other sponsors, instead of having to sell out for lack of funds or for lack of sponsorship. And the data that they produce, to Fredrik's point, enables us in the medium and the long term to reprice the efforts that they have gone to be effective. And I'm very sympathetic to Fredrik's argument, because in my previous experience for 5 years working for the UK government, it became clear that impact reporting was something that was being done by large offices in London and New York, and not by people on the ground. And it really has to be data that's generated on the ground and owned by people on the ground if it's going to be the kind of data that's going to be accurate enough for us to use. So as well as a market which keeps the social entrepreneur in position, it needs to be a market which keeps the data in position. So one of the things we're doing in the social stock exchange is making sure that the social enterprise continues to own the non-financial data that it generates. Now, in the capital market, all data is financial, but in this sense, very importantly, the social enterprise continues to own the data, which gives them they're incentivized to share. And that helps us to know what's working, but it also helps us to know what's not working. In a world where sharing that data is sensitive because donors are embarrassed that something hasn't worked, or hasn't worked as well as the program suggested, or hasn't worked as well as somebody else's program has worked. There are lots of disincentives to sharing that data. We want to create an incentive to share it, which is why sharing it will be in common with other social actors. And we think in that way also we can create an engine for improvement. And finally, we think that because of the repricing of all of the other kinds of capital which are being used without any kind of accounting, we can make social entrepreneurs' undertakings more valuable. We think that they should be properly valued as the most valuable kinds of business, because they're the businesses which are addressing the transition that we all know we're in, from an unsustainable use of the planet's resources and a destruction of social solidarity towards a world where social solidarity can be restored and where we can live sustainably. And a social stock exchange can provide a way for us to recognize that maybe the most valuable businesses in the world are not the businesses that we see right now on the ticker tape from the New York Stock Exchange or from the London Stock Exchange. They're actually the businesses that are being founded right now on much smaller scales, but with much higher impact, by the kinds of social entrepreneurs that I think are members of Catalyst 2030. And with that hope that we can achieve this reallocation and this repricing and this revaluation towards the kind of world which I think Sandra was describing at the beginning of this talk, we are intending to launch the stock exchange in Q1 of 2022, and it will be available for the issuance of equity, for bond issues, which of course have become the core of social enterprise through microcredit, and for fund creation, which we think will also be an important area for smaller scale businesses to be able to raise money on the market. And with that, I'll stop, and I will ask you, and I hope for your support, because the last thing I will say about stock exchanges is that they are places where people come together, and this initiative will not work unless we can all come together as entrepreneurs, as investors, as measurers, as sponsors, to make this work. So I hope that you can all see that there's an opportunity here to work together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tomas. So just to explain a little bit further from what Tomas has explained to me earlier, is that the amounts of money would be that you would need to raise on the stock market would be more suitable for the social entrepreneur. That is, you do not have to raise the millions to be able to have an issue on the stock exchange that he's talking about, that it would attract a specific type of investor who is wanting to invest in the support of the missions, which he emphasized at the very beginning of the organizations. It's not all about which one's going to give me the biggest financial return, or which one, as Fredrik would say, is going to protect themselves by some statistics that will keep them out of the doghouse. So I would like to just present here what's driving me and our Bounce Beyond perspective and the Working Group 11 perspective. And you're welcome to join in. Tomas is a member, active member in this, is that all of these pieces together are like different pieces of the plumbing system, and they aren't being connected as we need to connect them right now. So if we get Fredrik working with Ned and Tomas and get the new currencies involved, it is starting to describe the actual full economic picture of where we're going here and what we can do. And so we're very interested in Working Group 11, and we have a project underway to be able to identify these types of new emerging, what we call infrastructure for the economy, to be able to connect them in the different communities that Bounce Beyond is working with the different communities that people within Catalyst 2030 are working with, so that we can start to get the connections and the smooth flow of the new financial system, the new economic system actually working, so that people don't have to go around and figure out, where do I go now? How do I figure this one out? And it's just like you do now. You can go to the bank and you know that it's being taken care of from this value perspective. So we're near the end of our time. Maybe just any comments we could go quickly through. Some people who might have any comments to make, please feel free to put them in the chat. I apologize for the lack of time to be able to give the participation that we were hoping for. Nick, you've been very helpful in your chatting. Thank you so much. Just wondering if we have any other reflections that we'd like to bring forward. Siva, thank you for joining us today. Or Yasmin, do you have any comments that you would like to share?
Yeah, I can go first.
Please.
Yeah, where to start? I'm so inspired and awestruck by everyone's work. It's not just for namesake I'm saying, but truly, when Fredrik was saying how they're going from a bottom to top approach, I'm trying to start a B2B business platform connecting India, and I'm presently staying in Germany. So this was the biggest challenge for me, how to go with the certification and all that. I've been trying for almost 1 year, and today he's giving a solution for it. I'm like so happy. Yeah, this is very inspiring.
Thank you. Yasmin, would you like to make any comment or share?
Sure, I'm just bringing my camera. Very inspiring words from everyone. Yeah, such innovative new ways of envisioning the system, you know, from all different sectors, from the finance to the seafood. It really went across the board. For me, I might ask, a lot of the initiatives seem to be designed for the near to long term future, but what would be some initiatives that, you know, SEs in Catalyst Network, for instance, would be able to implement to kind of shift towards these new economies frameworks in their day-to-day work that they're currently operating?
So Sid is nodding at that. Do you want to add, Sid?
Sure. Well, I'm currently a part of launching a nonprofit and a business right now that is likely to get a lot of press coverage, and I can go into that later. But we're planning to get a story in the Boston Globe, and we'll mention our giving our customers, employees, partners seeds. So I think the more we share what we're doing in worlds that are more traditional, it'll just over time permeate. And yeah, I think it's just a matter of infusing this world into our current world and doing it with bravery and belief. And yeah, it's a dream, but we're actualizing the dream together. So go ahead, Thomas.
Well, just to follow what you're saying, Sid, this is happening in real time. So I don't want anyone attending this to think that these changes are going to take a decade or so. If you're preparing to use seeds, prepare now. And if you want to use Fredrik's measurement system, he's already live in 27 countries. And if you want to IPO on the social stock exchange, then prepare now, because we intend to be live in 9 months.
Thank you. Nick, you're showing.
I was just showing the seeds on my phone. Yeah,
Great.
You can get it. You can do it right now, Yasmin.
So just for everyone, the vision I've been trying to nurture with Working Group 11 is to actually do what Yasmin was intimately suggesting, which is to have experiments about how we can actually make the connection between these fantastic innovations and the Catalyst 2030 membership, so that we can actually have testing and learn how to do it really well and improve, because these are version 1.0 or 2.0, right? They've got to be improved too. And through our collective effort, I really hope that we can develop that. And so I'd invite, well, I'm in touch with most of you, but for the Working Group 11, that is the direction we're going. So please feel free to join us there. Thank you so much to our wonderful team from Faith and Nick, and to everyone who's come here to participate and share. I think for me, it was just as important that the presenters hear about from each other, because I think there's a wealth of things that I hope we can do together in the future. So have a good evening, late afternoon for you, and thank you for joining us. Bye-bye.
Wonderful.
Thanks, Steve.
Great to be connected. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks indeed.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Nick, everybody.